Hi everyone, it's Dr. Gress. This is the first of two lectures on the anatomy of the eye. This particular lecture is about the accessory structures of the eye, in other words, anatomical structures that are associated with the eye but not found inside the eye itself. So they're important to the function of the eye, but they're not actually part of the eyeball as an organ. As we talk about these structures that are part of the anatomy of the eye, we are going to be reviewing a number of the cranial nerves. So as you'll recall, there were 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And a lot of them, which you can see highlighted here in gold, have to do with the function of the eye. So they are supplying structures either within the eye itself or accessory structures of the eye with either motor or sensory innervation. And so we will touch on these as we go through today. All right, so first I just want to remind you of the area that we're looking at. The eyeballs and many of the associated structures are situated in a cone-shaped eye socket called the orbit. And the orbit is composed of a number of different bones. You don't need to try to remember all of these bones or identify them in a picture right now, but as you probably recall from your lessons on the skeleton, there are a whole bunch of bones here that contribute to the orbit or the eye socket. So this is an anterior view of the skull looking into the orbit. Here we are looking at an axial or transverse section from above, and here we are looking at a sagittal section from the side. So this area here is the orbit. You can see that we have the eyeball, associated muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and all of that is surrounded at the back and around the sides by fat, which cushions the eye. So if you were to get punched in the eye, your eyeball wouldn't just jam up against the bone of the socket here. It's cushioned by this periorbital fat that surrounds it and protects it. So the first thing I want to talk about in relation to the eyeball. Now we're starting on the outside of the eye, and in the next lecture, I'm going to move in and look at the structures that compose the eyeball itself and the various structures that contribute to our ability to see. But we're starting on the outside with some of the structures that are related to the eye, so external structures. And first of all, I want to take a look at the extraocular muscles that move the eyeball. These are sometimes called the extrinsic muscles of the eye, as opposed to the intrinsic muscles of the eye, which are inside of the eyeball itself. So these are little tiny straight muscles that attach to the outside of the eyeball, attach to the fibrous tunic or sclera of the eyeball. And they run from the eyeball back towards a little cartilaginous ring right at the back of the orbit that actually surrounds the optic nerve where it goes into the orbit through this optic canal. So there's this little cartilaginous ring. The little extraocular muscles run forward from that to attach to the eyeball, to the fibrous tunic of the eyeball. There are 4 straight ones that run straight from the top, bottom, and the 2 sides of the eyeball towards the back. Those are called the rectus muscles. Rectus means straight, and you remember that from rectus abdominis, rectus femoris. So these are the rectus muscles of the eyeball on the 4 sides. The superior rectus at the top, the inferior rectus below, the lateral rectus on the lateral side here, and the medial rectus, obviously on the medial side. Then we have 2 oblique muscles, the superior and inferior oblique muscles. The word oblique means diagonal, and these muscles sort of attach to the eyeball on the side and then move diagonally across it. The inferior oblique muscle, is fairly simple, and you can see it sort of through the eyeball here. We're looking down towards the bottom. It runs kind of across the bottom of the eye towards the medial side of the orbit. The top one, the superior oblique, attaches on the top of the eyeball, runs forward, and actually runs through another little cartilaginous structure at the upper medial corner of the orbit up here that's called the trochlea. A trochlea is a spool, and this is a little loop of cartilage that the tendon of the superior oblique muscle runs through, and then from there runs back towards that cartilaginous ring at the back of the orbit. So each of these muscles, when they pull on the eyeball, move the eyeball in different directions. So these muscles, in addition to, of course, the muscles that move our heads, are what allow us to look in different directions. Extremely important for us to be able to point our eyeballs at what we want to look at. Not only say if I want to look over here at my cat or over here at the corner, but if I am going to focus on an object, my two eyes have to move together and make sure that they're both pointing at that same object. So these are the muscles that do that. Each of the rectus muscles pulls the eyeball toward itself. So the superior rectus pulls it up, inferior pulls it down. The lateral rectus, you can't use both of your lateral rectus muscles at the same time. They each pull the eyeball off to their own side. So my left lateral rectus pulls my eyeball to the left. My right lateral rectus pulls my eyeball to the right. Okay. And then we have the medial rectus muscles, which pull your eyeball towards the medial side. They pull it towards the middle. These muscles are so important and so ancient that they have a whole set of cranial nerves that are devoted just to providing them with motor innervation. 4 of these 6 muscles are provided with voluntary motor innervation by the oculomotor nerve. Oculo means eyeball, and motor, of course, means motor. And these are the superior rectus, inferior medial rectus, and the inferior oblique. So the 2 extraocular muscles that have their own cranial nerves are the superior oblique, which is innervated by cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve. You should be able to remember that because remember that the superior oblique muscle passes through this little trochlea, okay, that little spool or loop. So that's what the trochlear nerve is named after. And then the lateral rectus muscles are innervated by the abducent nerve, which is cranial nerve 6. Now this is so named because the lateral rectus muscles abduct the eye or pull the eyeball off to the side, turn the eyeball to the side. So again, my right lateral rectus muscle pulls my eyeball lateral to the right. So that's why it's called the abducent nerve. So this should really help you remember it. So most of them are innervated by the oculomotor nerve. These are the exceptions. So those are the extraocular muscles or the extrinsic muscles of the eye. The next associated structure of the eye that I want to talk about are the eyelids, or also known as the palpebrae. So palpebrae is Latin for eyelids. So we have a superior palpebra or upper eyelid and an inferior palpebra or lower eyelid. These are made out of cartilage. The upper eyelid's a lot more mobile than the other, as you probably know. You can, raise your upper eyelid and lower it a long way. Your lower eyelid doesn't move nearly as much. The way that you open your eye is another little straight muscle inside of the orbit called the levator palpebrae superioris, runs from the back of the orbit and attaches to the upper eyelid. I'll show you another picture of it in just a minute. And when it contracts, it pulls back on that eyelid, which raises it up and opens the eye, sort of like pulling up a blind. So here's a picture of a lateral view of the orbit, a lateral section through the orbit. There's the eyeball, there's the optic nerve. Here are inferior and superior rectus muscles, okay? Right above that superior rectus, you see another long skinny muscle coming from that same area at the back of the orbit, and then it inserts on the inside of the upper eyelid here. So when this muscle contracts, it's going to shorten and it's going to pull that upper eyelid up, opening the eye. Okay, so that's called levator palpebrae superioris because it lifts, like elevates the upper eyelid. That, like most of the other extraocular muscles, is innervated by the oculomotor nerve. When we close our eyes, what we're really doing is squinching them shut using a muscle of facial expression, one of our muscles of facial expression that you will have learned about last semester, called orbicularis oculi, which means orbiting or going around the eye. So this muscle here marked with an O is orbicularis oculi. And it's a sphincter type of muscle, meaning that when it contracts, it's a circle that gets smaller. So when it contracts, it squinches the opening of your eye shut and closes the eye. Like all of the other muscles of facial expression, which you can see a bunch of them here in this picture, it gets its motor innervation from the 7th cranial nerve, the facial nerve. And one other structure I'll just point out to you here while we're talking about eyelids is in between the two eyelids, there's a gap called or a fissure, which is like a crack, called the palpebral fissure. Okay, so named after the eyelids. All right, so there again, in addition to levator palpebrae superioris, here you can see cross-section through orbicularis oculi, which is that ring-shaped muscle that goes around the eye and closes it. Again, innervated by the facial nerve. So here you can see a cross-section through it above the eye and below the eye. All right, now, lining the inside of the eyelid, so it's a cross section through the eye, right? Here's the upper eyelid, here's the lower eyelid, and lining the inside of the eyelid and the anterior surface of the eyeball, so covering the sclera on the anterior surface of the eyeball, is a membrane, an epithelium, called the conjunctiva. So that's colored pink here. So you can see it here covering the sclera and sort of doubling back to line the inside of the eyelid, both above and below. It's basically transparent, which is why we can see the whites of our eyes, even though we have that conjunctiva covering them. This protects the anterior eye of the eyelid, and its secretions help to lubricate the eyelid so that when you open and close your eyes, they don't scrape across each other and hurt. You may be familiar with this word conjunctiva from conjunctivitis. Conjunctivitis, you probably know that an itis is an inflammation of a part of the body, inflammation or infection. And conjunctivitis is an inflammation and reddening of this conjunctiva, this membrane covering the eye. And it's more commonly known as pink eye. It's usually caused by a bacterial infection and it's pretty contagious. So conjunctivitis is an inflammation of the conjunctiva. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about here on the outside of the eye is the lacrimal apparatus. Lacrimal refers to tears. And so the lacrimal apparatus is the set of structures that secrete tears and move them across the eyeball. So the main function of tears or lacrimal secretions is to lubricate the eyeball and the eyelids and to remove debris from the front of the eyes. So make sure things, that might be irritating the eye get washed off of the eye. Lacrimal secretions or tears are produced by the lacrimal gland. And this is a little gland that's right in the upper lateral corner of your eye. So up here, just at the edge of your orbit. And it has a number of little ducts that run down onto the conjunctiva, that is onto that membrane that's on the front of your eye. So these lacrimal secretions are released under parasympathetic motor stimulation from the facial nerve. So we just talked about the facial nerve providing voluntary motor innervation to the orbicularis oculi muscles. It also provides parasympathetic motor innervation to this gland here, the lacrimal gland, along with salivary glands as well. So those tears, those lacrimal secretions will then run sort of across the eyeball, medially, obliquely, to the corner of the eye, where they will drain into a duct called the nasolacrimal duct. So called because it connects the nose, naso, to this whole set of lacrimal apparatus here. So the lacrimal secretions normally drain out of the corner of your eye down into your nose. Now, when you cry, if you cry, you oftentimes get a runny nose, and you might have cried and someone hugs you and you get their shoulder all wet. Well, that's mostly tears. So even though that stuff is coming out of your nose, it's actually mostly tears coming out of your nose because those lacrimal secretions will drain out into your nose. Of course, you also know that when we cry, we produce excessive lacrimal secretions that can't all drain out into that nasolacrimal gland. There are too many of them, and they end up overflowing out of our eyes as tears that run down our cheeks. Nobody is quite sure why we produce tears when we cry. There doesn't seem to be any particular physiological function for it. Most likely that evolved as a signal to other people to let them know that we're really upset, that we're in a really fragile or sort of dangerous emotional state, and that they need to provide comfort to us or watch out because there's no telling what we might do when we're that upset. So people, when I'm in class, people usually ask me why we make extra tears when we cry, and most likely is it's an emotional signal to other people. Okay, so that's all I want to talk about for the accessory structures of the eye, the external structures of the eye. In the next short lecture, we'll walk through some of the structures of the eyeball itself, and then you'll have an additional lecture to look at on the physiology of sight. So in other words, how do we see? So that's all for now, and I'll talk to you again soon.